Good morning, and thank you for joining us today. Thank you for joining the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation educational webinar. Today we have two guest presenters, Ron Flewett and Debbie Roots. Debbie is a nurse and she qualified in 1984. She has a degree in specialized practice respiratory nursing and is a non-medical prescriber. Debbie is currently a respiratory nurse consultant at Homerton University Hospital in Hackney, London. She manages and leads and develops 4 services: respiratory, heart failure, TB, and allergy. Her background is in respirology nursing in both community and secondary care up to ward manager in Midway Hospital until 2010, when she moved into the community to set up a respiratory service in Bexley. Since then, she has led various respiratory services and improved care for respiratory patients. She is a Queen's nurse and co-chair of the London Clinical Oxygen Network. She is the ARNS lead for ILD and on the Respiratory Disease Subcommittee. Debbie is passionate about respiratory care and aims to improve services and support better care for those affected by lung disease. Ron Flewett was diagnosed in 2014 with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis at the age of 53, and he was told that he had a 3 to 5 year life expectancy. He made it his personal goal to raise as much awareness as possible for this chronic disease with no cure. He is a member of the EU IPFF and chairman of the Patworth Support Group, as well as trustee of the PFT. He has attended many awareness campaigns, including with NPs and NEPs in England and abroad. Thank you very much for both of you for joining us today, and we look forward to your presentation.
Hello, everybody. We're going to do a joint presentation, and we're going to be talking about oxygen. Oxygen is not the scary thing people think it is, and we're going to try and dispel some of those myths. Can I have the next slide, please? So we all need oxygen, and our lungs bring the oxygen into our body. That provides the energy and removes carbon. They also remove carbon dioxide, the waste product collected when you produce that energy. So we breathe the air in down the trachea into the lungs through the bronchus. We have pleural cavities. We have muscles in between the ribs called the intercostal muscles. And we have the bronchioles and the alveoli and the diaphragm, which is the muscle that is where we encourage people to breathe from. Next slide, please. So in interstitial lung disease, what we're looking at is damage to those bronchioles and the alveoli. So if you're looking at the healthy lung compared with the interstitial lung disease lung, you've got stiffening. Ron compares it within a sponge to a stone. So you've got areas of normal lung and then heart damaged lung. Fibrosis between the alveoli causes decreased gaseous exchange and reduced oxygen transferred to the bloodstream. Next slide, please. So who might need oxygen? Well, if you have low oxygen in your blood, either at rest or on exertion, you may need oxygen. It is not a treatment for breathlessness. Those that have low oxygen can look a bit cyanosed and blue around the nose, lips, ears and fingertips. And we always do a risk assessment to make sure it is safe to use. Next slide, please. So we need to assess somebody. We use a pulse oximeter. They're simple. They're an initial assessment. They're non-invasive. They're cheap, to be quite honest, and that displays the percentage of oxygen in your blood based on the hemoglobin. So somebody who's healthy, their normal blood oxygen saturation level will be 95 to 100%, but it will drop a little bit on exertion. However, if your hands are very cold, or you have very poor circulation or Raynaud's, or you're wearing false nails or bright nail varnish, it won't give you an accurate result. Next slide, please. So one of the tests that we do involves taking a very small sample of blood from your earlobe, very much like the finger prick you have done with diabetes. Quite simple, really not painful at all. And you would need to have this done if you were going to go on to long-term oxygen, because we can see how much oxygen and carbon dioxide there are in your blood, how acidic your blood is. And we do them in the UK, and we probably do them over there actually at the point of care, so we could do it in somebody's home or in a hospital setting. And if you do a fit to fly test, they will probably be doing this for you. Next one, please. The other test, if any of you have actually had one done, involves taking an arterial sample from the wrist. It gives very similar results to the CBG. It can be quite uncomfortable, and the needle there is a little bit high. Normally it would be in the wrist, down near the thumb end, but that can be a bit uncomfortable, that one. It's usually done in an emergency. There are other tests. Can I have the next slide? Sorry. The other test that we can do is called a gas transfer. So if you look on the picture, somebody's breathing in the gas that they're doing, and we're looking to see how much of it is diffused into the lungs. You have to blow into a machine, and it will tell your doctor or your pulmonologist how well your lungs can exchange oxygen into the blood. And the results will differ depending on your age, your height, your sex, and your ethnicity, as well as the level of hemoglobin in your blood. Because hemoglobin is the protein, the iron in red blood cells that actually carries the oxygen. So if you're very anemic, then you won't be carrying as much oxygen because you haven't got enough hemoglobin to carry it. Next slide, please. Actually, going back to the last one, Ron, you've done the gas transfer test, haven't you?
Yes, I have, and I do find these particular tests very tiring, and it requires a lot of effort, and it makes you cough a lot, especially when you're doing the DLCO test. It can make you feel very claustrophobic when you're sometimes in the box, and I have learned through yoga techniques to help, like take my time before they ask you to blow into the tubing. In other words, don't just blow into the tube when they ask you, just take 4 or 5 breaths, prepare yourselves, and then start to breathe in deeply. So yoga has taught me a lot how to control myself in situations when doing breathing tests.
Thank you. And you've had the capillary blood test as well, haven't you?
I've had the capillary blood test. That was more for fit to fly tests from memory, and I normally have that every year because going on holiday lots and doing long haul flights, they need to make sure that my oxygen requirements on board planes were met.
Thank you. So when we've done all these assessments, if your clinician decides that you need to have oxygen, then we have to start thinking how we're going to supply that to you. And the most common thing that we use is a machine called a concentrator that separates oxygen from room air and supplies you with pure oxygen. Ron has got one. That's probably what he's using at the moment with his nasal cannula. And it plugs into the wall, so we don't run out as long as we have electricity. Are you using the portable one at the moment?
No, I was getting the portable one out for like, I do use the home concentrator, and the thing is, where we live in the UK, if you have a power cut, you are given a standby cylinder which lasts between 12 and 24 hours from memory. So if we were to get a power cut, my darling wife would have to go out to the shed and get the cylinder in. So we've always got a permanent supply of oxygen.
So looking, can I have the next slide, please? So there's different, that's it. So Ron was just talking about the static cylinders, and these are what we use as a backup in case of a power cut, as he very rightly said. We also use them for some patients over here for cluster headaches, where we use oxygen at very high levels to try and stop those. But generally, that's what their role is, as a backup to having something bigger to have into the concentrator, which doesn't run out. But as I say, there's always that chance that there's going to be a power cut. Can I have the next one, please? So this wonderful gadget, it's a refillable cylinder on a concentrator. So the bottom part is the concentrator, and the top part is cylinders that you can actually refill yourself in the home. They're quite useful for people who live somewhere quite a distance away, that it's, you know, they can refill their own cylinders. We don't use them so much in London, but I have seen them used in the rest of the country. They can make a bit of noise, and there's a limit to how much. You can't really have the concentrator on more than 2 litres while you're filling up a cylinder. But they can be very useful, especially if you're in a remote area. That's the one piece of equipment you haven't got, Ron.
One piece I haven't got at all. You're dead right there, Debbie.
Next, please. Now, this is something called liquid oxygen, and it comes in a dewar. And then what you have is, if you look on the right side of the screen, there is a flask, and that is filled up from the dewar, and then it lasts about 4 hours. It's quite cold on your back to carry, I understand. You've got that as well, haven't you? So how do you find that?
I used to use the liquid oxygen up to about 6 months ago when they changed me for home concentrator. But I found the actual liquid concentrator very useful, because you can use it on constant, and you can also use it on demand. You're right, it's very light. I used to pre-fill before going on to my electric bike. They are quite awkward to refill because you need a lot of pressure to hold the cylinder down and press the button. The advantage of them was that, especially if I was working in London, they could last a lot longer than a cylinder. So where a cylinder may give me 2 to 3 hours of oxygen, the liquid oxygen would give me sort of 6 to 7 hours on 4 litres. So it was a very good bit of equipment and very light to carry, which was a positive. But it was cold on your neck.
And you have to have somewhere very safe, obviously, to keep this, because you've actually literally got liquid oxygen, and there is a risk. So usually they go in an outbuilding where they are safe to be kept.
And in the UK, you get a visit from the fire brigade, because obviously it's in an outbuilding, so they know if there's a fire nearby that there's liquid oxygen in the shed, and they will do a risk assessment on your house to make sure it's safe to use. And obviously, if there was a fire, they know someone is in the house that may need rescuing because they've got oxygen available. So you are risk assessed, I think, every year, isn't it? We've been a risk assessed every year from the fire brigade.
Yeah. And Air Liquide do a fire risk a couple of times a year, our oxygen delivery service as well. So that's for people that need oxygen most of the time. And then we're going to talk about if we need oxygen just to go out and about. Some of the problems that you can have, or issues, potential issues, is you can get quite a dry mouth when you're using oxygen. Thank you. And so you need to make sure you can drink plenty of water, or something that just keeps your mouth moist, sugar-free sweet or something like that. You can get a bit of a sore nose if you're using the mask, or you can get a bit sore behind the ears or on the bridge of the nose. If you can see on Ron's cannula where they go across behind his ears, so you can get a sore nose and you can get a little bit of soreness, but they're things that can actually be dealt with. You can get some cover for the tubing. You can use a mask to give your nose a break. If you do get a sore nose, the one thing we ask that you don't use is petroleum jelly, but use a water-based gel, because petroleum jelly is, as it says, is petrol, which is inflammable, and oxygen is inflammable, and we don't want to have double the risk of any incidents. We also say avoid creams and sun creams with oil or alcohol in them. So it's just using and learning these tips as you go along the way. Next slide, please. So ambulatory oxygen or portable oxygen has two uses. It's to allow people to go out and do exercise and do activities of their daily living, but it also enables patients who require long-term oxygen, so that's over 16 hours a day, to actually get out the house and enjoy life. Next one, please. And we have to do an assessment for this. And we in the UK, and I would imagine it's the same over there, do what's called a 6-minute walk test. So I know Ron has done this. Do you want to explain this one, Ron?
Yeah, thanks very much. Actually, when I was first diagnosed, I actually used to quite enjoy the 6-minute walk test because I used to put all my effort into doing as much distance as I could. And in fact, I hold the Papworth record. I think our first 6-minute walk test, I'd done 650 odd meters. But as my illness progressed, I found it harder and harder to keep up the speed. And obviously I needed more oxygen when I was doing the walking. It does give you a good indication of your progression, because at the moment I'm down to about 300 meters, which sounds good, but coming from where I've come from, I always like to say I'm a very, I used to do triathlons, I used to do a lot of swimming. So 300 meters is quite a small amount for me. So yeah, so it's a hard test, and obviously it's a good test to, as you say, if you need oxygen, it's a very good test to see if you need oxygen. I think, is it if it desaturates by more than 4%?
4%.
Yeah.
Yeah, and what you have is you have the pulse oximeter that we showed on the earlier slide, and Ron's probably got one he made earlier. There we go. They pop that on your finger, and then they can see what your oxygen levels are like as you're mobilizing around, and the machine bleeps as you do each stretch so that they can monitor you. And if your oxygen does go too low, obviously they will stop the test, so you are quite safe. So if you do find on room air that your oxygen drops, they will then put some oxygen on you and then repeat the test to see if there's a vast improvement, and see if that will help. Oh, can I have the next slide, please? Some people find it a challenge to adjust to using oxygen outside the home. But most people living with fibrosis find the benefits of oxygen greatly improve their quality of life. And there is no one who has not had more fun, more experience, and a better quality of life on his oxygen than Mr. Flewett.
Well, I should go into more details of what oxygen has enabled me to do. But basically, don't be embarrassed about using oxygen. Sometimes people look at me and ask me what it is. I just say it's liquid whiskey. So I always get a laugh from people. I always use it to my advantage. When I'm on a train, when I'm on a bus, people always give up their place for me. So I look at that as an advantage, because I'm guaranteed a seat wherever I go, because as soon as people see this, I wouldn't say they feel sorry for you, they just want to help you. I always, if I'm traveling, I always make sure that the cylinders are safely tucked away in the car, so they're extremely safe. When we're going out for the day, I always have to make sure that we have, this is charged up enough. I carry enough batteries, and I know that if I'm on 4 litres walking about, this will last 2 hours, another battery will last 2 hours. Maxine may carry a spare cylinder for me, so we know that we can go out for a long day, so we can spend 6 hours. As I say, don't use oxygen near a naked flame. Do not use petroleum-based products, which you said earlier, Debbie.
Yeah.
Obviously, do not smoke. Oxygen stays on your nose for up to 20 minutes. And I actually heard this tip from a transplant consultant, because I'm actually undergoing transplant assessment. And he said to me, before you exercise, flood your body with oxygen. It won't do you any harm. So basically, when I used to go out on my bike, I used to get a very tight chest very quickly. I see an oximeter on, and my oxygen levels would be about 86, 87. But after 5 or 6 minutes, it would go back up to the 93s and 94s. So when he said flood your body with oxygen, I get on my bike and it never dips below 90 when I flooded me. So that was a real good bit of advice. And I will say about oxygen, oxygen has enabled me to do the things that I want to do. It's not disabled me. It's been there to let me enjoy the things that I enjoy doing.
Thanks, Ron. I've just got a couple of slides to show you of the different equipment that we can use while you're out and about. So can I have the next slide past the memory table? That's it. So standard cylinders, they can be a bit heavy for people to carry, but for men, they're not too bad. Or if you're in a wheelchair, they can hang on the back in their bag. Obviously, you can see what they are. You can use the little gadget that he's got in his hand, the Sequoia, and that makes the pulsed dosage of oxygen, so the cylinders last twice as long, so the oxygen is only released when you breathe in. It's not that useful for people that need walking aids, and if you're small and you're frail, then it's probably going to be too much. Next one, please. So your next option is a portable concentrator, which I am going to have modelled by my friend. There we go.
And the battery there is very easy to remove. So Maxine, my wife, will always carry that in a handbag for us. So it's
so there's different versions. Some are a little bit bigger than others. They're getting smaller and smaller by the year, which is obviously a benefit. The batteries are starting to last a bit longer now. This one only goes on pulse dosage. But yes, these are very, very useful for people to carry. They're not particularly heavy, but probably the most effective way. You can also, when you're going out and about, use the liquid oxygen as well in the flasks. Next slide, please. So these are the transport ones. These are about the size of your cabin trolley on the aeroplane. And they can be used for ambulatory if you want to pull it along, or those that are less mobile. They're also good for people that go on holiday, so they might need to use it in their motorhome if they're going off in their motorhome, or if they're going to a secondary home or on holiday, you can just take it, or if you go to stay with family. So it's a really useful piece of kit that can be used. You can charge them in the car. Or you know, the motorhome if you want to. So they're quite useful, but they're obviously a little bit bigger. You don't carry them, you pull them along. Some people prefer them. Some people feel that going on and off buses, it's a bit of a hassle with them, prefer the smaller one. So we just have to titrate everything to what level of oxygen an individual needs and what equipment they're going to use, because you can put all the equipment in the world there, but if it's not going to be used, it's a waste. And it can make such a difference to your life, such a difference, because we're giving oxygen to your body, your organs as well, you know, not just your lungs, but we're protecting your heart, your liver, your kidneys by making sure that you've got enough oxygen in your system to make all these organs work. Next slide, please. That's all from me. So Ron is an absolute inspiration to me, and I tell him every time I see him. You can see some of the mischief he gets up to and what Maxine has to put up with. So, so I'm going to stand back now and let Ron tell you all about his story.
Thank you, Debbie, for that great talk on oxygen, what's happening in the UK, because many of our Canadian patients, they love to travel to the UK. So that was really, really great information. So thank you very much.
Welcome.
And Ron, I'm looking forward to your many stories of your ventures with your oxygen. So please take it away. And I know I have some questions that people would like to ask you as well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Debbie. That was really good. I really enjoyed working with you, talking about oxygen, so that's good. Right, my story. Well, my story started in 2014. I was diagnosed with a disease that I'd never heard of, you know, and it was, I was given a life expectancy of 3 to 5 years. So as you can imagine, I was rather depressed and rather got upset. I remember the first 2 or 3 days, us two crying. I'd not long met Maxine, and I thought I'd met the woman of my dreams. Well, I knew I met the woman of my dreams. I thought, and I thought I was going to lose her, but that's another story. 2 weeks after diagnosis, I can always remember I was on a train travelling home from London from work, and it hit me big time. And I thought, why me? Why me? What's happened to me? I do triathlons, I swim a lot, I used to play football, I'm very active, I belong to cycling clubs. I thought, this can't be right, this can't be right. So I got home, and me and Maxine sat down. We always do things together as a couple. We always discuss things. We always bounce things off each other. And we decided you could have there's a positive road that we could have taken, or a negative road. We could have let the disease consume us, or we could do something positive about it. Thankfully,
Fight back.
we decided to fight back. We took the positive road, and taking that positive, you said, Sharon, I've been very lucky. I'm a member of the European IPF Federation. I'm a trustee of a great charity back in the UK. You know, we provide practical support for patients with pulmonary fibrosis or idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis. We also do caravan holidays for them so they can make their own memories. So it's a lovely little charity. And I chaired a support group, and I work very closely with most of the pharmaceutical companies, whether it be Boehringer, Roche, you know, telling my stories and helping them with understanding the disease and where it takes us. And I've been lucky. I've appeared on lots of TV news shows, radios, and newspapers. So taking that positive road certainly changed my life, and it made me realise it changed me as a person. You know, we were both working full time. We were foster carers. I was going off to work. So, but it totally changed our life, which I'll go into more detail soon. My bucket list. Well, we got married in 2016, and we just started travelling, and we went to Jamaica for our honeymoon. And Maxine sat down to us one day. She said, "Ron," she said, "you need to fulfil your bucket list." And he said, "What is your bucket list?" I said, "Well, I haven't really thought about it." And I said, "But I love travelling. I absolutely love travelling. I suppose part of my bucket list is I want to do all the continents and all the oceans of the world." So we realised the only way we could do that was
small task.
Not small task, was to do it by cruising. So off we went, and she said, "Well, what places do you want to go to?" So it started, well, I want to go to Alaska. I want to go to Canada. I've got to say that because I'm talking to Canadians. No. So I want to go to Canada. I wanted the Norwegian fjords. I wanted to go to the Far East. I wanted to do the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, the tallest building in the world. So we set about making all these plans. Halfway through, I suppose after visiting about 20 countries, a bombshell, to me at the time, a bombshell landed on me. I was told I needed oxygen. So I really thought that was going to curtail our plans. So we sat down and we decided that no, this is not going to stop us. We're going to still carry on travelling.
We just readjusted, thinking.
We just readjusted our thought process.
Where there's a will, there's a way.
So as we carried on cruising, and you know, every time we booked a holiday, I had to make sure that the plane had oxygen on. You know, I'd always phone up the travel agent, say I want to go on this holiday, but before I book it, I need to know that there's oxygen on board, and I won't book it until you confirm there's oxygen on board. And being a bit cheeky, as Debbie said, I would use the illness to my advantage. I'd say I need a seat near a toilet, because on a plane it's 16% oxygen as opposed to 21% at ground level. So the moment you move and walk on a plane, my oxygen levels would dip quite lowly, quite low. So I would, excuse me. So I would always say to them, I want a seat near a toilet and I want that seat free of charge. So I was using my, and they always agreed to it. Under medical grounds. So they always agreed to it. So, and then obviously once I boarded the plane, I used to make myself a pain in the backside when it was fine, didn't I? Because I'd get to the airport and I would never check in by one of the computerized automatic. I'd go to the check-in desk and I'd say, excuse me, but I've got oxygen on board. Yes, they look on the computer. Yes, you have. Then when we go down to the gate, I would say to them, I'd go to the card, I'd say, I've got oxygen booked. They look on the computer. Yes, you have. When I was boarding the plane, I would say to the stewardess, chief stewardess, said, no, Ron, I've got oxygen. Oh, you're the man. Yeah, you're on seat 16 and your oxygen's going to be there. And the nice thing when you're on a plane is they look after you very well.
Very good.
They come and check the levels of your oxygen, make sure you're fine, you know, and the service.
Long haul, they would make sure he had enough oxygen before they turned all the lights off so that he could get asleep without them having to disturb him to check the cylinder. So they were very good at really making sure that everything was as comfortable as possible for your journey. I don't think they ever made you feel awkward or, you know, you were being a pain. In actual fact, they were very accommodating. Very
accommodating. I mean, and the other thing, we always took the airport assistance because, as people know, gates can be an awful long way from what you call it. So we always took the airport assistance. And again, the advantage of that, I always look at things as an advantage. I don't look at it as a disadvantage. The advantage of taking the airport assistance was I was always boarded on the plane first. So I was always watching my film first. So I was always getting the drink served first. So to me, that was an advantage and not a disadvantage. But going back to going on planes, what we quickly realised was even the simple act of me lifting a suitcase would send me into severe coughs, coughing fits. So my wife here, she does all the lifting. She puts all the cases onto the conveyor belts. She takes all the cases off the conveyor belts. She puts the cases onto the coaches.
But they always ask if you want help. So the point is, although, you know, as a man, Ron didn't like me doing it at first and felt embarrassed because obviously in front of all these people, the wife's doing it all, and it really, you know, it goes against what everybody believes. But if we don't do that or accept somebody's help to put it on for us, and 9 out of 10 times they will, if they see me struggling, they go, oh, let me put that on for you. If that we don't accept that, then our world is really small. And why would we lose out on making all these amazing memories and having such a fun life just because basically, if you like, pride is stopping him? You know, pride. So we had a talk about it and we said, look, to enable us to enjoy our lives together, we, you know, as this disease progresses, we have to accept that things move, you know, responsibilities will shift. But ultimately, you got a bit upset at one point, didn't you, about it?
Oh, I get very upset.
But I turn the tables, as I like to do, and say, if it was me in your shoes, you would have to do all the jobs that I do, and I would have to accept that. And that's what a partnership's about. You're there to help, to take responsibilities when they're needed. And it's not that you can't. In actual fact, I think that that's my way of showing my love and support for him by enabling him to still go out and live and enjoy life.
Yeah. And going back to what she says, we've made so many memories. And when I stood on the Burj Khalifa and looked at the Burj Khalifa, we've been in Alaska on the, you know, the Alaska was amazing. And I actually, water rafting. I actually said to her, we've wasted our life on a sunbed. This is what we should be doing. You know, the Norwegian fjords. I could just go on.
Brazil.
Brazil, Rio Beach was
Rio.
absolutely
That was
amazing.
in 2019.
Yes, just
Yeah.
before. So my opinion is I've not let oxygen stop me from travelling. In fact, I would say we've done more travelling since diagnosis of IPF and being on oxygen than most people have done in their entire lives. We've done 78 countries in about 5 years.
I think if you hadn't accepted oxygen, we wouldn't have been able to do an awful lot of our journeys. And certainly now, Ron's on oxygen at night, but we still go away, obviously, because of COVID. We still go away in our motorhome all around England, and we take the concentrator, and he has that on in the night to sleep. So even now, we've still adapted. How can we work around this? How can we make this work for us? We need to keep safe. We've got a motorhome. We go around. He has that on at night. So we're still finding ways around. Where there's a will, there's a way.
But anyone that's got any, I mean, we've got some little stories that Sharon asked me to tell you guys, because some of them are quite funny actually. We was on a cruise ship going across to America, and I said to Max, I said, I want to go to the disco. I said, but Ron said, we're always going to bed at 10 o'clock because we was going after dinner, after the show. We was going back to our cabin, and some of the older people, the youngsters, were all going up the disco, and I was getting rather irritated about it. So I said, I want to go to the disco. So to enable us to go to the disco, what we decided, we'd do it with a day at sea, so I could have a lay-in, and then we'd have a nice relaxing day, and then we'd have an early dinner.
Well, actually, I told you to go and lay down in the cabin for
When
a
the
few
late-
hours
yeah,
in the
when
afternoon
the
while I
lady-
sunbathed so that you could stay up for the disco.
But at 11 o'clock, we went up to the disco, and I took my concentrator with me. I put my concentrator on the floor, and I learned how to dance without moving too much. I was just sitting there. And I had the most amazing 45 minutes, and I just felt so alive. Just going to that disco, just that once, was absolutely fantastic, absolutely brilliant. And it's not always been fantastic. We've had a few problems,
Got a few
hiccups when we've been travelling. I mean, there was once we was travelling down to Southampton to pick up a ship, and we decided to go via train, and I chose the wrong route across London, and we was at an underground station, at one of the longest escalators in the country, which normally isn't a problem. Is put the suitcase on the escalator.
I have both suitcases.
And some kids at the top press the emergency stop button, and we was about a third of the way up. Now, for normal people, that isn't a problem. They're suitcases, but for us, it was a major problem because with these suitcases, we couldn't leave them, and we had about another.
I couldn't possibly walk up the escalators with a 20-kilo case and the other one. And obviously I was worried about Ron, how he was going to get up them. But it was a matter of seconds.
Two young lads
Came up and said, we'll take these up for you. And I'm like, oh. And then, like, yeah, but I can't leave Ron and I don't want to leave my cases. So I went up with them and somebody came down and escorted you up to the top.
I was lucky. There was a nurse at the top, said, what's the problem? Maxine told him what was the problem is. So this nurse come down to us and I'd be oxygen up. She made me walk 2 steps at a time. And then she got to the top and she said to the station people, this man, you need to take him to his train platform. And she arranged everything for us, which was absolutely fantastic. So although it was a problem, there's always someone there.
Yeah, I have to say, I've been astounded. You know, I might have only been having to lift a case up 2 little steps, but I can guarantee there'll be usually some person coming, I'll do that for you. I'll do that for you. And I'm like, I'm all right. And they go, no, I'll do that for you. You know, and everywhere we look, we don't have to ask. There's always someone there to help that are happy, you know, because I think what we all forget is that at the back of all of our minds is one day that could be me. And if I help people now, you know, maybe that will be returned to me one day. And I know that I would do it for people. And I think we forget that people do have that about them.
Yeah, there's always something to help. But going back to one of my other favourite stories, we done a transatlantic cruise coming back from America, back to Europe. And when me and Max go away, we tend not to tell people about the IPF. We tend to steer clear. We don't sort of harp on about it, do we? And we met this lovely couple that I'm still in contact with today. And we laughed and joked with them. But what they didn't see when we left the restaurant, we'd go back, Maxine would walk up 2 or 3 flights of stairs, I would catch a lift. So I never put any strain under my body because I didn't use my oxygen when I was on board ship. So we docked at Gibraltar. We'd been with this couple for about 2 weeks. We docked at Gibraltar because they didn't see us. All they saw us was on board ship, walking on the flat and walking up Gibraltar High Street. And I called him Jock because his name was Jock. And he was standing at a bar and he went, "Ron, what's that?" I said, "It's liquid whiskey." "No, seriously, what's that?" I said, "Well, I've got this lung disease called IPF." And they asked about it, so we told him. And he said, "We didn't realise." He said, "You two are the life and soul of the party. You enjoy yourselves." He said, "You've got all these problems." And we both turned around and said, "Well, we've achieved our goal then. We've not harped on about our illness. You've accepted us for who we are. And we always have an amazing time."
Yeah. It was just about having getting out and enjoying life, making memories.
Making memories. And the other thing about oxygen is, as I've said before, I love exercise. I love going on my electric bike. I've got a thirst for exercise. So I'll either fill up my cylinder, I put it on my back, and I know that I can go out for 2 hours on my bike, on my electric bike, because I've downgraded to electric bike. I haven't got a road bike anymore, but it enables me to do the things that I love doing. I walk whenever I can. If I can walk to the doctors, which is about 1.5 kilometers away, I will walk to the doctors. I will use my oxygen. So that's about keeping me as fit as I can. I've done a couple of pulmonary rehabilitation classes, and what that has taught me is to exercise within my safe limits. So I do lots of body pump in the morning with my son-in-law, but I know when to stop. I can feel in my chest if it is getting low that I need to stop, and the oxygen levels are going. I use that. Maxine wants to talk a bit about how she avoids me getting colds.
Yeah, I think this illness, as the loved one, care, or whatever people call themselves. I mean, I'm Ron's wife, but I also do look after him. I have learnt a lot about this disease because I chose to, and I wanted to, because I felt I couldn't help him if I didn't learn about it. One of the things in the early days, we sat down and I said to him, "Don't hide things from me. We must go through this together. We must discuss it, whether it's good or bad, or I'm having a bad day and I'm like, oh, my life's not what I expected. He's having a bad day. We talk about it, and then it disappears, and you can move on and you can enjoy the rest of it. It's if you don't deal with it and it niggles, that it tends to build up into something. It's so important to accept that you might be scared, to accept that you might be worried about what's going to happen, to accept that sometimes oxygen can change a personality a little bit. But if you talk to other people that are going through the same thing, you realise it's part of the journey, part of the process. And it makes it easier to deal with, and to go set up a list together of what you want to do, what you want to achieve, go through everything, have a checklist, and make sure that it's as simple as it can be, so that maybe something one of you might have forgotten, the other one's remembered. Just try to do it as a team, because this is really hard when you are pulling against each other and one of you's thinking things but you don't tell the other one, but you know they're down about it, but you won't tell them because you don't want to upset them. You can't do that with this. You've got to get out there. You've got to be honest. You've got to say what you want out of your life, and you've got to go for it. That's how I see my role. Anything Ron says, well, I'd like to do this. There are some things I have to say no, that it's not, you're past that stage now. But that's okay, because, you know, we'll deal with that later. But most of the time we will find a way, because we look at it together. Or, to be honest, sometimes I'll go, well, you can't do that walk this morning and then go and see people later, or, you know, have a barbecue in the garden with friends, because you can't possibly do all that. So we'll do the walk today and we'll do the barbecue tomorrow. You know, sometimes you do need pacing.
Yeah.
But again, you have to do it. You have to think about it and be able to be open as you can together and work as a team. As I said before, it doesn't matter who's doing what anymore. You're doing the best to get the best out of your life.
Ron and Maxine, thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions that I would like to ask you from our audience. So one of our questions is that someone wanted to know, how are you coping with this pandemic, and how are you dealing with the traveling, given the fact that you need oxygen, there's a pandemic? How do you get around in the UK?
That is a very, very good question. We shielded for 15 months, basically, because the consultant at Petworth, because I'm being seen by the lung transplant team, said, Ron, if you got COVID, it could preclude you from a lung transplant, or it could take you down levels that could, you know, you may not have that lung transplant. So we took it extremely serious. We had our shopping delivered, our prescriptions were being delivered. We didn't allow anyone in the house.
No, only saw people outside.
Only see people outside. If we went for a walk, it was on our own. We spent a lot of time on FaceTime talking to family.
We did when it eased off a little bit. We went out in our motorhome and we went to sites that are fairly quiet, maybe only 5 caravans, motorhomes on the site. And of course, because they're well spaced apart, you don't actually have to come into contact with anybody. We did one trip, which was 3 weeks away, and with a lot of careful planning, I took 3 weeks worth of food with me, either food that didn't need to go in a fridge or freezer, or frozen food in the freezer, and then loads of fridge stuff. And we managed to be away for 3 weeks. And the only time I bought bread or milk was when we had to fill up with fuel, because I had to go in anyway to pay for it. And yeah, we managed, and that was it. So we managed to get 3 weeks away in our motorhome, going around Scotland, enjoying it, but not going near anybody.
And with the oxygen in the UK, if we wanted to, we are very lucky. We could phone up Air Liquide, our oxygen supplier, and say, we're staying at this site for 6 or 7 days, and they will deliver oxygen to that site or that hotel. But obviously with my concentrators, I don't need that service, but I have called on it a couple of times.
Great. The next question for both of you is, especially for Ron, someone wanted to know, how long does it take you to top up your oxygen level prior to cycling? And then how long and at what oxygen flow?
Right, that's a good question, because what I tend to do is, before going for a cycle, I touched it on the presentation, that I flood my body with oxygen. I will then go on my bike, and I do wear an oxygen wrist meter that I can look on my iPhone. And what I tend to do is I don't let my oxygen go below 90%.
But how do you flood it?
when I flood it, I literally flood it on 6 litres. I literally flood it on 6 litres. And the consultant said, it won't harm you. So I've got a good oxygen supply in my body. So as soon as I start exercising, I would say 5 minutes, about 5 minutes. But if they're on 2 litres, I'd flood it with 4. If you're on 4, I'd flood it with 6. If you're on 6, I'd flood it with.
Yeah.
I'd always go more.
I think it depends on what the clinician has decided is the level that you need. I think you need to, you know, be properly assessed, because I know you can buy equipment and things, but I think you do need checking by a healthcare professional first. There are some people that have COPD, not so much with IPF, but if they have too much oxygen, it can give them problems. So I think it's just, you know, worth seeing what you're actually prescribed, if you like. I mean, Ron's been told by his consultant that he can do that. So it's just getting it checked.
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that, Debbie. The next question, Ron, is like many people will say, with all this travel, Ron, how do you purchase travel insurance? Many people struggle with this.
Right. Having a life-limiting illness puts up your insurance premium a lot. A lot of people, when they're filling in the forms, whether it be on the internet or whether it's a paper form, a lot of people will say, is your illness terminal? A lot of people put yes. Well, IPF isn't terminal, it's life limiting. So a lot of people get refused insurance because they've answered yes to that question. What we've done as a couple, I suppose our insurance has been about £1,000 a year when we was travelling.
Worldwide, yeah.
Worldwide, we took a worldwide insurance, but because it was costing us a lot of money, we decided we need to go on lots of trips to make that money well worth it. So it is expensive. I mean, to give you an idea, Maxine being a healthy person, her worldwide insurance is
For a year
is £75.
70.
Whereas mine's, I think it's about £900 to £1,000
That
a year.
included America,
Yeah.
basically everywhere,
Yeah.
for a year.
So it's very expensive, but I always say to people, fill in those forms, but IPF isn't terminal, it's life limiting. Because a lot of people used to phone me up and say, I've been refused insurance. It's because they tick that box that it's terminal, but it's not.
The other thing that raises the insurance premium is if you've been in hospital. If you haven't been in hospital, the insurance isn't as high as if you have been in hospital over the previous year.
Okay. So Ron, did you have your respiratory, ILD, respiratory, did they help you fill out your forms, or did you do that on your own? Did you have Debbie as the nurse help you fill it out? What was your process?
I speak to other patients, but when there's forms to fill in, if you're traveling, like you have to fill in oxygen forms, and the only people that can fill that in is your respiratory nurse. So if I've got to take oxygen abroad, they have to tell me, they have to put on the form what your oxygen requirements are and why you're traveling with the oxygen. Was that the correct answer? Was that the question?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So every time we travel abroad, I'd have to phone up my respiratory nurse and say, I'm going so and so, so she'd fill in the forms for me. Then she'd send them back to me and I'd forward them onto the holiday company. And it can be painful. It can take quite a while to actually complete them forms. So obviously we travelled a lot, so I do it well in advance.
Okay, so Ron, someone wanted to know, when you take these cruises or you go to these travels, do you inform the cruise line or wherever you're going that you need oxygen, you have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis? Do you tell them that or no?
Sharon, can you repeat the question? We lost you halfway through. Yeah. Sorry.
Someone wanted to know, do you inform the cruise that you're going to be on, or whatever destination you're going to go to, that you have idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis and that you require oxygen?
Yes.
Okay.
If I require oxygen, when I had IPF before I went on to oxygen, the answer to the question is no. But because I was on oxygen, obviously, because I'm carrying a concentrator with us, the cruise company need to know that you're carrying a concentrator with you. And they do come and knock on your door and ask you if everything's okay. So yes, you do need to know, let the cruise line knows. No, sorry.
Okay. And then someone wanted to know, they know that there's medication to stop the progression of IPF. What are your thoughts and experience on either one of the drugs?
Right. Well, I've been extremely lucky. I've been on both drugs. I've been on pirfenidone. I was on pirfenidone for 4 years. And I think it's a wonder drug. A lot of people may disagree with me, but in my mind, I've done talks with pirfenidone, and when I was diagnosed, I was something like the 50th person in the UK to go on pirfenidone. And I'm pretty sure without pirfenidone and nintedanib, I wouldn't be here today, because I did have an instance where I had to come off pirfenidone for 6 months because of rashes. And in those 6 months, I lost 9%. Went back onto pirfenidone. I was back on pirfenidone for 2 years, and I had a large drop 1 year, which then set the alarm bells ringing. I had to go for a lung transplant assessment. So they put me on to nintedanib, or OFEV, as some people call it, and I've been on that now for 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think the thing is, there are lots of side effects with both of them.
Both drugs, yeah.
But the way we viewed it when Ron started to get a few side effects, fatigue mainly with pirfenidone, and obviously the diarrhea with nintedanib, is if he'd been diagnosed with cancer, we wouldn't have thought twice about him having chemo and all the side effects that would have given him.
Yeah.
We would have gone for it because you just do. So why would this be any different? Because this is still a life-limiting illness. So we decided to give it 6 months of pirfenidone.
Oh yeah, remember it.
We sat down and said, right, let's agree 6 months, see how you feel after that. Because I think the first 3 months with pirfenidone, it was a bit of a rocky road, and then it settled down and he was fine. And so we sort of done things in stages. Again, we discussed it. What is it worth keep trying? What should we do? Yeah, definitely. Again, you've got to think you're dealing with something that's quite serious, so don't expect not to have the side effects, and learn how to manage them, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's slowing the progression of a very serious illness.
Yeah, it's 7.5 years down the line.
7.5 years down the line, I feel very proud.
Thank you. And how did you manage the side effects when you're on these drugs to travel? Like, how did you manage, to still travel and be on the drugs and dealing with the side effects?
Do you know what? That's a great question. On pirfenidone, I kept out the sun. I bought UV clothing 50 rated. So if Maxine wanted to be on a sunbed, I would go and sit on a sunbed in the shade. If we was walking along the road and there was a sunny side of the road or a shady side of the road, I'd walk on the shady side of the road.
The fatigue.
The fatigue, I would rest. I mean, sometimes, we've been cruising and we've done lots of cruising, but sometimes the fatigue can get to you. So I may have an afternoon snooze. So I'll leave Maxine upstairs on the sunbed and I'll just go down for a few hours. That's on pirfenidone. On nintedanib, I kept a food diary. And if I suffered the chronic diarrhea, I would look at the day or the day before and try and eliminate the food and introduce it again. And we pinpointed 3 or 4 foods that cause the diarrhea along with nintedanib. And if we're going out for the day on the cruise line, my doctor's prescribed me, I can never remember what it is.
Loperamide.
Loperamide.
Yeah, so I would have a couple of tablets before going out. So just as a safety measure.
And they're always in my handbag.
And always in a handbag.
Great. Well, thank you. And the other thing that someone wanted to know is when you go and travel to these countries, did you find your cruise line helpful if you ran into an emergency, or how did you deal with emergencies? Like if you ran out of a battery, not that you have, but what happens if your equipment broke or you feel unwell? How did you deal with it?
That did happen, didn't it?
Yeah, you had something wrong with one of the
I had a very old concentrator.
batteries.
That's a good question. I had a very old concentrator that had 5 batteries that lasted 2 hours at a time, and the lead broke and it became intermittent and I couldn't use it. So I went to the ship's officer, or the, what you call it, reception. And I remember saying to them, look, I'm on oxygen, I need this. And they said, leave it with us. And they gave it to a chief mechanic and he repaired it for me. And I used that lead for the next 2 or 3 years because he made such a good job. But we've been lucky, we've done lots of travelling. We've not had any problems as such. I mean, what we was trying to do before COVID was along with yourselves, if I visited Canada, you could recommend Ron's in Canada. These are the phone numbers if you've got problems.
We did in Brazil.
And we did in Brazil. We went to Brazil and knew a young lady from Boehringer that knew some ILD consultants and some people with IPF. And they gave me their contact details just in case of an emergency. Thankfully, we didn't need them, but it's always a nice, you know, so if one of your Canadians come over to the UK, they could have my phone number, and if there was any problems that they suffered, they had a concentrator, I know how to get them repaired, etc. So we could try and help people in that way.
Great, Ron, because I know that before COVID, I was working with you and several others trying to create an informal network so that for those who wanted to travel, you had a backup in case of emergency, someone that could help you to navigate the healthcare system. So anyways, I don't know if there's any other questions that people from our audience would like to ask, or if there's another one that you want to share with us, Ron. I know that you had a tip about when you were in your cabin at night, how you used to use a wet cloth to keep from having the nasal building up in your nose. I don't know if you're okay to share that tip.
Oh, we should have got your holiday forms out. We used to have some holiday tips that we used to do at support groups, and I'm talking extremely slowly because Maxine's just going to get her tips. We call these Maxine's holiday tips, and I can read them out to you because, in fact, it's very similar to the COVID tips. We can't believe how similar our tips were before we wrote them.
Yes, I
found. I will record a couple. We always took hand sanitizers with us. When we never visited buffets on board ship, we always ate at a restaurant. I always used to use, before going to bed, I would turn the air conditioning down to cold. So when I got back in, then I would turn it to hot or hotter, because sometimes the air isn't so damp when it's heating. I'd always have a wet cloth next to my bed. Here we go. Always take a supply of antibiotics. In the UK, we're told to take a supply of antibiotics. We always research the area we are going. For instance, if the hotel is at the top of a hill or hotel has lifts, this can be a problem. Always get insurance. In fact, we've got some insurance companies here, but obviously it doesn't apply for this. Use Vaseline at the end of your nose at night if air conditioning room.
If you're not on oxygen.
If you're not on oxygen.
Yes.
Yeah. Wet a towel and leaving room during night as it takes all the moisture from the air. Always take a copy of prescriptions from doctor and carry in the original boxes. Always helps if stopped at airports, and list of emergency contacts.
I always take the last hospital letter with all the consultants' names and the last things that they wrote about from the last consultancy appointment.
And we try wherever possible to avoid sudden difference in air temperatures, as this affects the cough. We always take spare medication. If we're going on a 3-week holiday, we'll take 4 weeks. On a plane at holiday destination, we use dual defence nose spray, which helps stops risk of infection.
It's called First Defence, I think, over here as well. So
Great.
We always take our latest clinic letter, which explains our illness in detail. We always, when we go on trips, we always plan our trips. Is there steps? What are the limits? Is there hills? We do lots of research. If not, we'll go down to reception and say, this trip's how many steps? We've never been asked of that. So we always do lots of research.
Yeah, one of them was there was 80 steps down to this place. And Ron said, well, is there a lift to come up? And they went, no. So he said, well, we're not doing that then.
Use lifts wherever possible to conserve energy for things that I enjoy. I'll always use lift on board ship. I've always said eat in main restaurants, not buffet, because you know the risk of picking up infections. We've always carried hand sanitizer long before COVID. Avoid touching handrails. We always avoid touching we can't believe it. I would never touch a handrail walking down a ship's, walking down. Never touch a handrail. We always sanitize our hands very often. We always stored our toothbrushes in holders. So obviously
you don't know what they're spraying around.
You don't know what they're spraying in the ship. If taking oxygen concentrator on board the plane, you must inform the airline, which I've already said. Yes, and the last thing we want to say, we was on a P&O cruise just before COVID, where over 500 people got the norovirus. Ron and Maxine didn't, because we adhered to all these rules that we put in place.
So Ron, if you wouldn't mind sharing that list with me, I can post it on Hope Breathes Here, and people can kind of look through that and create their own things that they should do if they're looking to planning on a trip. So that was really great that you do a lot of research about how many hills, how many steps, and take elevators wherever you can to conserve your energy. Ron, someone on this panel wanted to ask you, did you experience a rash when you were taking Esprit?
Yes, but it's a long story and I won't take you into the story. It was a rash that was a cause of the sun cream that I was taking. And when they took me off it, I went to my doctors and my doctor said, that rash isn't due to medication, it's due to something else. And I had what they was called, I forget what they're called now, patch test. And it's shown that it was the actual sunblock that I was using. But they did put me back onto pirfenidone, but they said, be careful, we know you're sensible, be careful. So I bought a load of hats, I bought the sunblock 50 clothing, I wore trousers all the time. So I was actually on pirfenidone, and I wouldn't say to people do this, I'm just saying what happened to me. I was on pirfenidone for about a year not using the sunblock because I couldn't, because as soon as I used it, rash.
Okay, well, that's good to know, Ron, because some people are wondering if it's the medication, but it could be because of the sunblock that you're using. So that's good to know. Yeah. All right. I was going to ask if there's any more questions from the participants for Ron. This has been really great. So I've learned a lot about traveling, how you can get insurance, how you should do lots of research about where you're going. You want to tell the cruise line that you are, taking these medications and that you need oxygen, and to make sure they provide it, as well as that really helpful tip with the airline. Never thought about needing that to say I want to sit near the washroom so that I can access it and utilize that if I need be. So that's really great, and you didn't have to pay extra because they always said, well, it's for medical reasons. So that's always excellent. So it's always good to know. I like that attitude, Ron, to ask for these things and not have to pay for it. I think that's great. That's a real advantage to utilize.
Well, my mum always said, if you don't ask, you don't get. So I'm always asking. But one final note I wanted to say to everyone is, if you've got to go on oxygen, don't consider it a disabler. It is, I consider it as an enabler. You know, it enables me to do the things that I love doing.
How long have you been on it now?
I've been on oxygen for I couldn't believe it, over 4 years. And I think that's why I'm doing so well. Sorry to carry on again, because it's protected all my organs. I think that's why I've done so well. I've been on oxygen, and I don't mind it now. It's part of me. If people see me out and I've not got this on, where's your oxygen?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say, I want to thank Debbie for sharing the knowledge on oxygen, what's it like in the UK. And I want to say thank you, Ron and Maxine, for sharing your personal journey with oxygen and traveling. I think it's given our participants a lot of food for thought, and some very probably some really good ways of thinking, oh, how can we travel, right? So I think I like the fact that, you know, if there's a will, there's a way, right? We just have to plan it. We just have to think about it. It might take a little longer, but we can still do it. So I want to thank you both for sharing that, because not everyone feels comfortable in sharing their personal journey, but it's so great to hear other people that can do it, because it makes you think as well. So thank you, Debbie. Thank you, Ron.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Maxine. And thank you everyone for joining us today. And just know that this webinar session will be available next Friday if you go to hopebreatheshere.com. And thank you for joining the Canadian Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation. Thank you.